I want to call today's budget work session of the Raleigh City Council to order. Mayor Baldwin has a sudden conflict and is unable to be with us, so she is absent and excused from today's meeting. Before we get started, I want to share some thoughts as we officially begin our annual budget review process. Setting the city's annual operating budget and capital improvement program are among the most important decisions that we make as a council. I know that my fellow council members and I take this responsibility very seriously, because setting the budget is a reflection of the commitments that we have made to this community. There's a saying that comes to mind each budget season, which is attributed to President Biden. Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. That's a great challenge to keep before us in any budget season, but particularly now, as we look toward another year with so many uncertainties. We know that the needs of our community are great. We know that many are looking to us to show leadership and to invest in ideas and infrastructure that so many rely on. This is why it's so critical that this council once again sets a budget that reflects our values. We also have a new city manager to guide us through this year's budget process. Fortunately, Manager Adams David knows this organization as well as she knows this community. We look forward to her continued leadership as she helps us navigate this process over the next few months. With that, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Nicole Stewart. What an awesome opening to this year's budget deliberation process. So just so that we can get this ball rolling, for those of us who get excited about budget cycles, we have officially declared this time of the year the most wonderful time of the year. And so literally it is an opportunity for us to put priorities and not only into a program evaluation, but also into dollars and resources. So on today's agenda, we have 4 items. The first is a fiscal year 2021 budgetary and finance outlook. And we have Mary Viggy from the Office of Budget and Management Services and Allison Bradsher, CFO from the Finance Department, here today to sort of kind of give us a comprehensive overview of many of our funds, to include the parking fund, the Convention Center and Performing Arts Center Fund, as well as other general fund expenditures throughout the city. So with that, I will turn it over to Mary.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and members of council. Again, I am Mary Viggy with Budget Management Services, and I am joined today by Allison Bradsher with our Finance Department. Today, we will provide you with an update on the city's financial performance through January. Allison will provide an update on key general fund revenues and 2 enterprise funds that are experiencing major revenue losses: the Raleigh Convention Center Complex and the Parking Fund. Other enterprise funds, such as Raleigh Water, Stormwater, and Solid Waste, are performing within expectations and were included in the financial report that is attached to the agenda item. We will not be presenting on them today. I will then provide an update on the general fund and capital improvement program, and Allison will provide an update on the general fund debt model. The fiscal year 2021 citywide budget was just over $1 billion. General operating departments, including public safety, parks and recreation, transportation, and central support departments, represented 47% of the budget. Our enterprise funds, such as Raleigh Water, parking, transit, and solid waste, represent 33% of the total budget. As a reminder, general operating departments are supported primarily through property tax and sales tax, while our enterprise funds are self-supporting through user fees. Most of our discussion today will be focused on the general fund. The fiscal year 21 adopted budget totals $507.7 million. That is a 2.2% reduction over fiscal year 20 budget, as we dealt with the uncertainty of the pandemic. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Allison to discuss our monitoring efforts and the performance of our fiscal year 21 revenues.
Thank you, Mary, and good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I'm Allison Bradsher with the Finance Department, and I have several slides to provide an update on the general fund revenues and the enterprise funds that have been hit the hardest from the pandemic. As you know, staff continues to monitor the national trends taking place in the economy, including federal stimulus and grant opportunities to help offset the cost to city operations in response to the pandemic, and to seek opportunities for programs available to citizens who are struggling financially. Many of our revenues continue to be impacted by the local economy, and we are closely following the governor's phasing orders and reopening plans. There are additional economic indicators in your agenda packet for your reference. Property tax by far is the largest revenue source for the general fund, and in the FY21 budget, it was $257.6 million. As you know, 2020 was a revaluation year here in Wake County, and Raleigh adopted a revenue-neutral tax rate, 35.52 cents per $100 of assessed value. For the revaluation, the approved appeals exceeded our budget estimate and is largely due to commercial properties appealing the tax value. There were over 8,900 appeals here in Raleigh, and a total assessed value of $1.2 billion has been approved to date. Currently, there are almost 100 cases that have moved to the state process at the Property Tax Commission level, and we will be watching those closely, so that may increase the value of approved appeals that we factored into the projections. We did lower our collection rate for property taxes this year because of the uncertainty due to the pandemic, and we are tracking closely to our assumed collection rate. We have collected 97.6% of property tax revenues through January, and we will carefully monitor the future collections as final notices have been sent. There was a 6.7% increase in notices that were mailed, and that dollar value is a $1.1 million increase over prior year. Once we factor in those items, we believe that property tax will miss the current year budget by at least $1 million. Staff is closely monitoring the property tax as we understand the impacts of the pandemic have had on the community, especially the hospitality sector. A House bill, specifically HB 119, was filed last week, specific to potential legislation around deferring property tax payments past our fiscal year end, eliminating interest, and possibly reviewing assessed values for the period starting in March of last year. We will monitor this proposed legislation. However, it's too early to understand, if approved in its current form, what the financial impact would be to the general fund. Sales tax is one of the most volatile revenue streams for the general fund and is tied directly to consumer spending. Staff does anticipate sales tax to exceed budget by $8 million this year, which is a huge benefit to the general fund. This is largely due to the stimulus bills passed at the federal level, one in April of 2020 and one in December of 2020. That has kept the economy strong. Not only have the federal stimulus delivered relief to many Americans, but it has increased unemployment options and other benefits for those in our communities that have been hit the hardest by the pandemic. We are monitoring the Biden administration's American Rescue Plan and the assumed impacts it may have on the economy. The projection assumes the economy continues to remain strong in the second half of this fiscal year, and that the stimulus packages continue to positively impact the economy. Overall, a good news story, and sales tax is estimated to exceed budget. General user fees are an area we continue to highlight, and the story here really hasn't changed since I met with you in November. We do expect that development services user fees will exceed budget this year. The department has seen an increase in residential and multifamily home permitting. The actuals through the first half of the fiscal year are at 55% of the budget. Unfortunately, park user fee revenues are a different story through no fault of the department. As you know, Parks has been working closely with the Wake County schools to offer programming while kids are learning in virtual environments. With limited to no other park program happening and the capacity limits and other restrictions in place, we do not anticipate Parks will meet budget this year. We've only collected $800,000 for the first half of the fiscal year. This slide contains a snapshot of all the other revenues in the general fund, which account for just over 23% of the remaining budget. Due to losses we have discussed in the previous presentation in November, specific to the Powell bill allocation from the state of North Carolina and franchise tax due to the changing weather patterns, we do not anticipate this section of other general fund revenues will meet budget this year. Overall, we do anticipate that general fund revenues will meet the base budget, primarily driven by the large positive variance in sales tax. This is certainly welcome news in a year like this one. I would also say that while we expect the revenues to meet budget, the projection of $494 million is actually well below where we landed last year, which was $502 million. So the pandemic is certainly impacting our revenues here in the general fund. And the pandemic is impacting three of our enterprise funds as well, specifically the Convention Center Complex, Parking Fund, and Transit. There is additional information included in your agenda material for transit, as this function has been able to utilize CARES funding. So I'm just going to focus on parking and the Convention Center Complex. I'll start with the Convention Center Complex, which we anticipate a loss between $4.3 million and $4.8 million this year. As you know, the hospitality industry has been and continues to be one of the hardest hit sectors of the economy. The two graphs show the county-wide prepared food and beverage and occupancy tax collected through December of 2020. The green line was last year, and you see the huge dip in collections in the spring of last year at the onset of the pandemic. The blue line is the budget for this year, and the orange line reflects current year actuals. So to date, the prepared food and beverage has exceeded our expectations, but as you can see on the graph, is still below the same time last year, and honestly, it hasn't moved much since the month collections of June. And a different story for occupancy tax, which collects about $1 million a month. It is far below the base budget. The city continues to partner with the county and others to review trends and expectations for current year and next year as the budget process begins. As we shared in November, the parking fund is seeing a significant decline in revenues with a net loss of between $3.9 to $4.4 million expected this year. Staff brought to you in December a current year budget amendment of $2.1 million to help the fund. However, that's not going to be enough, and we can expect that as we close this fiscal year, the parking fund will have depleted its fund balance reserve. Therefore, it is expected this fund will require a subsidy to help balance the budget in FY22. Staff from Transportation, Budget, and Finance continue to review trends and look for opportunities to identify any savings in the parking fund. And I'll turn it back to Mary to discuss general fund expenditures.
Thank you, Allison. So I am now going to go through the general fund budget and discuss our ongoing activities monitoring the fiscal year 21 operating expenditures. We have not seen significant changes from the Q1 projections presented in November. The 2% across the board pay adjustment was implemented in December 2020, and we anticipate the general fund utilizing approximately 96% of budget authority, which is in line with previous years. Personnel and benefits represent the largest general fund expense, totaling 59% of the total general fund budget. We implemented a hiring freeze in the Q4 of fiscal year 20 and extended that freeze into fiscal year 21 for non-mission critical positions. As you can see in the chart, our current personnel expenses are in line with fiscal year 20, which is resulting in salary savings and helping meet the vacancy credit assumed in the fiscal year 21 budget. We have also been closely monitoring our operating expenses. Year to date, we have seen slower spending in the areas of travel and training, vehicles, operating supplies, and professional services. As we move into the third quarter of fiscal year 21, we are continuing to jointly monitor our general fund expenses and impacts due to changes in operations. In summary, revenues are projected to meet budget. Expenses are performing as expected due to the monitoring efforts put in place, and at this time, we do not anticipate the general fund experiencing a net loss in fiscal year 21. This is in large part due to staff's ongoing commitment to serve our community during this difficult time while ensuring we meet our overall financial metrics. Also contributing to no net loss is the FEMA reimbursement for PPE and the CARES Act allocation from Wake County that we received. The fiscal year 21 capital improvement program was impacted by a reduction in general fund contributions. However, our enterprise funds like Raleigh Water and Stormwater continue key infrastructure investments. The fiscal year 21 CIP continued the investments approved in the 2017 transportation bond. Fiscal year 22 represents the final year of appropriation for this bond package. The general fund did invest $11.5 million in capital investments in fiscal year 21, including $6.2 million for affordable housing, $3 million for resurfacing and bridge repairs, and $0.9 million for Parks, Rec, and Cultural Resources capital maintenance, and $1.4 million in general public improvements, including economic development programs and area and corridor studies. To offset the loss of general fund support, City Council approved $4.9 million in 2/3 bonds to complete funding for street resurfacing, $1 million for sidewalk improvements, and $1.2 million for ADA improvements and bikeway implementation. As a reminder, there is no capacity to use 2/3 bonds for fiscal year 22. We will bring back an update on the fiscal year 22 through fiscal year 26 CIP at the April budget work session. I will now turn the presentation back over to Allison, who will discuss the general fund debt model and available general capital reserves.
Thank you, Mary. Debt funding is an economical and practical way to pay for the CIP project Mary just spoke about on the previous slide. Specific to the general fund, we have two debt types, general obligation or GO and installment financing. The Local Government Commission oversees both types of debt financing. One of the key differences is general obligation debt is approved by the voters here in the city of Raleigh. Council may recall the city issued short-term financing in the spring of last year, specifically for our general obligation debt for parks and transportation bonds. With interest rates remaining low, the short-term financing draw program has been beneficial to the city, and we are currently able to lock in additional savings with our partner PNC. We do plan on utilizing this tool again, and we'll be coming back to you at a future council meeting as we review cash spending needs for the new fiscal year. The city has a general debt model that is housed in finance, and we have targets that we monitor to align to benchmark AAA entities. The city of Raleigh has maintained a AAA credit rating since 1974 by all three rating agencies, which allows us easier access to capital markets and ensures the lowest borrowing rates in the marketplace. Property tax is the primary source of funding for our general debt service obligations. As we begin the annual budget process, we ensure that the model has audited figures for the prior fiscal year. We work with departments on the timing of cash for project delivery, and we align with the CIP budget. This year, as we begin the FY22 CIP process, there is debt capacity between $60 to $70 million. This capacity could be used for general public improvements, project cost overruns, or could be used to help offset a potential tax rate increase for any upcoming general obligation bond. This chart sets up a timeline scenario should council elect to hold a bond referendum this year on the October 2021 ballot using the current election schedule that is in place today, pending any changes to the calendar. The key date, which is circled in red, is your second meeting in May, where council would need to advise staff as to the amount and purpose of the bond. Then at the next council meeting in June of this year, the first vote would occur to complete the necessary processes with the LGC and Board of Elections. The value of a penny is shown at $7.6 million, which means if you were to raise property tax by 1 penny, the amount of revenue generated would equal $7.6 million. That revenue would be used to pay debt service on the bond and cover annual operating costs. Should council move in this direction of holding a bond referendum in the fall of this year, finance would assist in final sizing needs and key financing assumptions of the deal. Just as a reminder to council, there is approximately $8.2 million left in your general capital reserves, which is the balance that can be used for critical one-time non-recurring needs or can be maintained as reserves. I believe that is our last slide, and we are happy to address any questions, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. Does council have any questions at this point in time before our next presentation? None? City Manager, I do have one question about capital reserves. I'm trying to remember what staff recommends we hold in reserves, noting we have the 8.2 million in there.
The Local Government Commission requires us to have at least an 8% in our reserve account, and we here in the city of Raleigh at a minimum maintain 14%. So we're in good shape.
And what would that equate to in a dollar amount? I'm sorry.
14%, Mary, is that comparable to the 8.2?
We would have to bring that back to you in terms of what that actual number is. We don't know that 14% calculation at the top of our head. The 8.2, I'm giving more money, is above and beyond that amount. So
right.
Once we do that calculation, the 8.2 is what is remaining that is at council's discretion. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Council have any other questions? All right, City Manager, back to you.
Okay, the second item on the agenda is the City of Raleigh Program Catalog. And this comprehensive document will highlight the diversity of programs that we offer here in the City of Raleigh. It will also give us a general overview of the resources that are required by us in order to provide those programs. And we have Mary Vigue to do the second presentation as well.
So I first want to thank Mayor Pro Tem because I think you keyed this up with your earlier opening remarks. Because one of the things the program catalog does is allows us to really understand where our resources in the city goes. And we too believe that where those resources go is where the priorities of our community are. So this project actually started in the fall. I will take a moment to thank all of the staff that worked diligently to pull this together. And so one of the questions you may be asking is, what is a program catalog? And so for us, it is a resource document, a communication tool, something that we will use during budget development or with departments as we put together their business planning processes. And it also assists us in looking for opportunities for improvement as an organization. I also think of the program catalog as a communication tool. It is our tool to be able to tell the city that this is what we do with the resources that we have. So what is a program? For the purposes of this document, a program is defined as a set of activities grouped together by a common purpose that produces outputs and results. So the program catalog, which is attached to the agenda item, which is a very lengthy document of about 100 and some pages, However, it does have an interactive table of content, so council can pick select departments and click on them and be taken to their different programs. But what we found was, as a city, we identified 278 programs. The report is organized by department. It includes both general fund and enterprise funds. The cost information and personnel data is based on our fiscal year 21 adopted budget. It identifies our stakeholders and our revenue sources. And one important fact, it also links our programs to our strategic plan key focus areas. So we make sure that we're aligned with our community and our city council goals. An important thing to note, when you look at the program cost, the information is intended to indicate a current level of effort for the activity. Those program costs do not represent budget savings. So that's a disclaimer we want to put out there. So as you look through the program catalog and see costs associated with each program, that does not necessarily represent the go-away cost if that program was to be reduced or changed. Several reasons for that. One, shared overhead. Departmental overhead and supervisory support is often stretched out across the entire department and allocated to the different programs. We also split full-time staff support. So in the example of the Department of Budget and Management Services, I think we have five programs in there. So for example, my FTE count is actually spread based on the time I allocate to each of those areas, whether it's the operating budget, the CIP, or the strategic plan. And any revenues would have to be calculated as well that are collected for the program. So in short, additional analysis would be necessary to determine any budget impact if a service wanted to be enhanced, reduced, or eliminated. So what did the report find? So Raleigh offers a large and diverse group of programs to meet the needs of our community. One of the things we found is as the community continues to grow, the program catalog can assist us in linking the strategic plan, our business planning, and our resource allocation. It is also, to us, a snapshot of our priorities as an organization in terms of where our resources go. We are working to better enhance this program and the catalog to provide future opportunities to include linking programs to performance metrics and even into the budget process. And so what you have in front of you is the first step as we think about our various programs in the organization. And so as council works through their retreat and through the budget process, we hope that you'll find this information useful as you look at how we allocate resources across our organization. And so I'm happy to take any questions about the program catalog.
Thank you, Mary. I see a question from Councilwoman Branch.
Yes, thank you, Mary, for the information. And I see in the future there's going to be a performance measurement, and I was wondering what's the time frame for that? Because I take it, obviously, you're basically doing an audit of all of the programs, I take it. And I just wonder what's the time frame?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say an audit. I think what we'll do is we continue to work through the program catalog and linking our budget allocations and working with the business plans. Departments are already collecting performance measures. It's linking those performance measures specifically to the different programs so that we get the bigger picture of not just the resource allocation, but also how that program is doing. In terms of a time frame, we'll continue to work on this potentially next budget season as we continue to improve this process.
Okay. So this leads me to my another question, my final question. How often do we do an audit of our programs to make sure that, you know, I know we receive community input, but how often do we go and look at that numbers of participation, people touched, the demographics? Do we even collect that information of our programs? And if not, city manager, what do we need to do to start doing that going forward? I asked a lot, but I'm done.
Well, I mean, the simple answer is it depends on the program, right? And so what you have in there represents all programs in terms of that. I think if you would talk to like a Parks, Rec, and Culture Resources, for example, they're probably monitoring that more often than more of your internal services and some of the others in terms of program participation and numbers. A lot of departments or most departments are collecting performance metrics for their business planning process. So they are doing that ongoing monitoring of service delivery. You know, for example, Raleigh Water probably has metrics on almost everything they do. And so they use that data as they work through their business plan and provide reports to the city manager and to the budget department.
And so just to add to what Mary Vigue just noted in that response, Councilmember Branch, depending upon the programs, obviously, as they build their budgets for the upcoming year, they look at the metrics of the performance of those particular program areas from the previous year. As we get better in our strategic planning performance tool piece, we will have a little bit more information that we can share with council for an overall view of the programs within the city. But certain areas, to Mary's point, do a very good job of it because they build their budget based on the demand for services from the community.
Councilmember Knight.
President Pro Tem, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. Thank y'all for putting this together. I like this is innovative to me, and I like looking at the budget process through this lens. So I'll admit I have not dove deeply into the document yet, but I plan to. But I appreciate the opportunity to go through this with y'all, and I think this is a good way for us to have a different lens at looking at the budget. Thank you.
Any other questions? Y'all are a quiet bunch today. All right, City Manager, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. You are moving this meeting right along. Agenda item number 3, Mary Vigue will provide a sneak peek for you into fiscal year 2022 general fund updates. She will talk to you a little bit about some of the deliberations she and her staff, as well as the department heads, are making throughout the city to prepare the budget that we will bring before you in the next couple of months. So with that, I will turn it over to Mary.
So continuing into the fiscal year 22 budget update, again, I'm Mary Vigue with Budget Management Services. As you may recall in past years, I presented an update on the budget process to help provide context on where we are in the process and major cost drivers impacting that process. Today, I will discuss some of those major cost drivers, talk about our 5-year general fund model, and talk about a prioritization process to help get your input on what issues matter the most to you. As a reminder, due to anticipated economic impacts, the fiscal year 21 general fund budget was reduced by 2.2%. Many of these reductions are important as we think about the fiscal year 22 budget process because they impact some of our policy decisions. We implemented a citywide hiring freeze and no new positions were added. Departments submitted budget reductions totaling $2.8 million, including cancellation of the 4th of July fireworks, reductions in professional services and operating expenses, and a 25% across-the-board reduction in travel and training. We also reviewed our general fund transfers for capital, and we're able to prioritize existing resources to cover most of our fiscal year 21 needs and reduce the capital transfer by $11.5 million. So we've kicked off the budget process in December internally and asked departments to reallocate existing resources to respond to any service needs or growth pressures instead of asking for new resources, understanding the current environment that we are in. We are currently reviewing what departments submitted and are early in the process. We work closely with the finance department to evaluate revenue trends to determine preliminary revenue growth. As Allison mentioned earlier, we are continuing to evaluate any ongoing impacts to property tax growth. We do anticipate growth in sales tax as this key revenue source continues to outpace expectations. We continue to work with departments to evaluate user fees, and overall, we are anticipating positive revenue growth for fiscal year 22. So this year, one of the things we did is we began to think in the budget process about our expenses differently. So we began to categorize items into 3 buckets: our base budget, mandatory increases, and policy decisions. The base budget is the prior year adopted budget minus any one-time cost. This represents funding required to maintain a consistent level of service based on our prior policy decisions. We then identify mandated cost increases and key policy decisions which impact year-over-year expense growth. Our estimated base budget is approximately $507.7 million. As we think about mandated costs currently built into the fiscal year 22 budget process, examples include the final year of the state's mandated 1.2% increase for the local government employees retirement system, the city's contribution to maintain a competitive benefits package, our municipal elections, and our debt service payments. These mandated costs represent approximately $13 to $15 million in growth. We also have a number of policy decisions being evaluated based on available resources. These include determining our fiscal year 22 merit increases, whether or not we continue a hiring freeze to achieve a vacancy credit, looking at restoring the $13 million in our CIP reductions in fiscal year 21, and any additional funding priorities identified by City Council. So these policy decisions that we currently have represent approximately $15 to $23 million in expense. So based on these preliminary revenue and expenses growth, so if you look at this chart, you can see we had our base revenues of 507.7. We have a growth in revenues of about 10 to 14 million. We have our base expenses, our mandates, and our policy decisions. And depending on where we go as an organization in any of these categories, we currently have a current gap of $14 to $28 million. We also look at trends impacting the budget over the next 5 years to better understand how decisions made today impact the financial outlook long term. We recognize that assumptions and conditions will change over time, and each year, the city manager will recommend a balanced budget. Key assumptions in the model include known cost increases, annual personnel increases due to merit and benefits, a slight increase in key operating accounts, no program expansions, and a slow restoration of the fiscal year 21 CIP reduction. I will note the current model does not include the previously approved tax increase to support the affordable housing bond, which will be included as part of the fiscal year 22 budget. So we look at our 5-year projection summary and understand that that fiscal year 22 base is a combination of mandates and policy decisions. And at this point, it is just a placeholder in that 22 year. When we look at what occurs in the out years, you can see that each year there's a budget gap of anywhere from 8.7 million to where we get out into fiscal year 26, it's about 12.6 million. And so why does this occur? So as we look into this in more detail, revenue growth is primarily driven by property and sales tax and averages anywhere from 10 to 12 million each year. Personnel and benefits increase on average 10.5 million each year. And interfund transfers and operating expenses increase on average 3 million combined. So our projected expense growth outpaces our revenue growth. Without new revenue resources, we will need to continue to identify new ways to provide valuable service while at the same time being fiscally responsible. I will say it is still early in the budget process. We will continue to work with departments to evaluate policy decisions, and we'll come back in front of you in March to present enterprise funds and in April to discuss the capital improvement program. We will present a balanced budget on May 18th, and we also continue to monitor federal policy to determine if the city will receive additional federal stimulus. I now want to shift a little bit, and this year, as an ongoing effort, we're going to try something new with City Council. So to help us identify what is important to you, we are requesting that each council member complete a brief survey to identify up to 10 priorities for fiscal year 22. And this will ultimately be part of City Council's retreat. We will compile these submissions and send a follow-up survey for each council member to then identify, based on the initial list, 5 top priorities and 5 high priorities. And so some examples of these could be things that we are already doing but are still a high priority to council, such as affordable housing, or bike lanes, or roadway projects, or parks and recreational programming, things like that. And so as you go through these, in the first round, you'll identify 10. We'll take all of council's answers, combine them, send them back out, and then ask council to identify the 5 top and the 5 high. So how did we define what they were? So a top priority are initiatives of greatest importance for fiscal year 22 with an expected 1-year deliverable. And so those are those things that need to be done immediately that we need to think about including in the fiscal year 22 budget. A high priority are initiatives of importance but do not raise to the level of top priority for the current year. And so those have an expected deliverable of up to 2 years. As part of this process, coming out of City Council retreat, and so there's a budget portion of that on the agenda, where we will review where council votes for their top 5 priorities for fiscal year 22 and their top high priorities, which are ultimately thinking about in terms of fiscal year 23, where they'll be talked about and confirmed. In follow-up to that, at your April 5th work session, staff will return with action items. And these will be action reports that identify either areas where we're already doing the work. So, for example, affordable housing, how much resource we're already dedicating in those areas, and then potentially what are options for either increasing resources there or reprioritizing things in order to make that priority occur in fiscal year 22. So a look at the calendar. So we will send out that email either later tonight or tomorrow morning. So you'll receive a digital survey to enter your priorities. We're requesting that council complete that by March 1st. That's next Monday. Then by March 4th, we will turn that back around so you can receive your prioritization exercise of all those submitted priorities. And then we're asking you to complete that and send it back to us by March 8th. We'll review that with you at your City Council retreat. And as I previously mentioned, we will have those action reports ready for City Council at April 5th. And that's an important part of this because there may be decisions that council needs to think about or direction that we'll need as staff as we think about the development of the final recommended budget for 22. So that was a lot of information, and I'm here to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you again, Mary. Councilmember Cox, I see your hand.
Yes, just to recap, our general fund revenues are primarily driven by property tax and sales tax. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you're projecting a decrease in total revenues. So in other words, we would, according to this one report, it says we're expected to collect $494 million compared to last year, which was $502 million, which is what we actually collected last year. I'm a little unclear if we're exceeding our sales tax expectations, and we haven't really lost much in property tax, or maybe we haven't lost any property tax. Why would that number go down?
So we are anticipating a growth in 22. So for fiscal year 22, we are anticipating a revenue growth in our base budget. So as we continue to monitor that this spring before we present a recommended, so at this moment, we're projecting revenue growth of anywhere from 10 to 14. And a lot of that is primarily driven by sales tax doing better current year than we expected. So as you mentioned, our 21 report that we gave you shows that sales tax is exceeding our current year budget because we lowered that last year in the spring when we weren't sure what was going to happen with the pandemic. But we have found that we are exceeding that budget this year.
Right, and if we're exceeding the budget, then wouldn't it make sense that we would collect more money than we did in 2020?
Well, Yes and no. There's other factors in there that influence that. For example, our Parks and Rec revenues are down $4 million, so that's going to have a swing. We also, our sales tax dollar is lower than it was in 20. So while we're exceeding the budget in 21, we lowered it, which it was lower than what it was in 20.
Okay.
So remember, we reduced the budget by 2.2%.
Okay. So our sales tax performance depends on what we're benchmarking it against.
I'm sorry? Yes.
Our sales tax performance depends on what we're benchmarking it against.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
But just to add to what Ms. Vigu said, Mr. Cox, I think where you're going with the rest of that question is there are other revenues that make up the total revenue stream for the city. And so while those two categories are performing better than we had projected, some of the others are not performing up to our projected amounts. And so it's sort of kind of balancing out that way.
And the other thing to consider when I talk about 22 is while that is performing better than anticipated, our revenues in terms of 10 to 14 million, our expenditures are still outpacing in terms of that growth. So what we pay in terms of benefits and some of those mandated increases grow faster than our revenue is growing. So that was kind of where I was going with the revenue discussion.
Councilmember Knight and then Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mary, just real quick on the priorities, thank you for allowing us to do that. I think that's a good exercise for us to go through. Will y'all give us a list of priorities to choose from just so that we're kind of working off the same terminology, or will it be as open as we want to pick a priority?
It's as open as you would like. Now, one thing we'll do as staff is when you send them back in, if wording is close, we'll try to push them together, right? If somebody says affordable housing one way, or there could be environmental issues, and so I won't plead to be the expert there, but they may come in a host of different ways. And so, and when they go back out, we'll put any kind of descriptions with them that we can. When they're presented to you for retreat, we are also going to align them with the strategic plan. So try to put them in context of our key focus areas. So that's some of the other work that we'll be doing. But we were going to leave it wide open in general for council in order to get your thoughts. And then as we narrow it down, we'll work on some of that wording.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple questions about our hiring freeze. Am I remembering correctly that didn't apply to public safety positions?
Yes, sir. No sworn positions are included in the hiring freeze.
Okay, great. And second question, if I may, and I'll admit this is not purely a budget question, but more of what's the impact on the organization and the people. My imagination tells me that the longer this goes on, the more retirements or voluntary separations will result in empty positions. And if we continue with the hiring freeze, that means other people got to pick up the work. So I guess two-part question, am I understanding that correctly? And how close are we getting to the point where this is going to stress the organization and the employees that are here?
So I don't know if you want me to take the first part of that, City Manager. So we call it a freeze, and it is. Some of it is just to slow the hiring. So we have hired positions this year, especially key critical positions in departments. So we've created a process where, working with the city manager's office, departments can submit a request to unfreeze a position. And so monitoring that throughout the year, we've actually unfroze quite a number of key critical positions. So especially frontline workers. So if you think of solid waste, our maintenance workers in Parks and Rec. And so those pieces, we've been making sure that we've been able to keep moving those along in the process. I mean, long term, yes, a hiring freeze is not something sustainable in terms of the impact on the organization. As we think about when COVID ends, we'll be optimistic and life can return back to normal. Opening facilities, and right now we're doing business differently. And so some of the positions can naturally be frozen, but once maybe we resume, those positions will have to go back. And so part of that discussion about the 22 budget is how much of that vacancy credit do we need to keep in? in order to balance, and how much can we lift so that we can slowly begin to lift that hiring freeze on the organization. So I don't know, City Manager, if you have anything to add.
I think you did a good job, Mary. The only thing that I would add is we have an internal work team that meets biweekly, and we take a complete look at what department heads have submitted to unfreeze their positions. And we have been quite generous as we've realized how we can maintain a level of resiliency through the pandemic. We have opened back up some positions so that people can get to work.
Any other, oh, sorry, Councilmember Branch.
Yes, thank you. Is there a way in a future meeting or report, can we get a graph that shows how benefits have increased over the last 5 or so years, so that we can get an idea of when you say it's outpacing, you know, that's one thing to say in terms of 1 year, but if we could see the graph and how it's performed over the number of years, I think it'll help council and as well as I think us working with others on how we can try to find other ways to address these mandated increases.
Yes, sir. We can definitely provide that information. You've seen some of it before previously, and so we can definitely show you everything from salaries to benefits in terms of that growth over the last 5 or 6 years.
Any other questions? Mary, I would just echo that I'm really looking forward to the budget prioritization question for council and seeing that back at the retreat. So thank you. City Manager, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. And you sort of kind of stole a little bit of our thunder with your opening comments about priorities, but we talked about this several months ago, and we thought that during this critical time period that it would be important for council to get a little bit more ingrained in the budget process and not just listen to presentations, but help inform what the decisions in those presentations look like. So each of you will get some homework, and we will make sure that you get it in on time, because we'll work with your analysts to make sure that you get that information back to us. So moving right along, we have the 4th item on our agenda this afternoon. You may recall Councilmember Buffkin asked about park maintenance issues for PRCR back on the January 19th City Council meeting agenda. And so today we have Oscar Carmona with PRCR, who will give us an overview of where we are with park maintenance.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart and members of council. Once again, Oscar Carmona with Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources. Today, I'm going to be presenting an overview of our PRCR capital maintenance budget. It will basically include just a brief overview about our system, what our maintenance resources are, including preventive routine maintenance and our CIP maintenance, a comparison with some other cities within the state of North Carolina, our capital improvement maintenance timeline from FY10 to FY20 budget, our estimated budget needs, and also some financial strategies moving forward. As you can see from our PRCR system overview, we have over 10,000 acres of park and greenway land, 118 miles of greenways, and just slightly under 200 park and open space properties. Now, moving along to our maintenance resources, we do have our preventive and routine maintenance program, which basically we call our operating budget. And this is funded through our general fund, and it includes just planned, ongoing, and preventive maintenance. And we're just really trying to keep things in operation. One thing to note down there in the examples, which includes building system, roof inspections, flooring repair, et cetera, I do want to point out that we do accomplish these tasks in partnership with other city departments, such as facilities and operations. stormwater, and transportation. So we do thank them for helping us with some of these routine maintenance tasks. But once again, we're not here to discuss preventive and routine maintenance this afternoon. We're here to talk more about our capital maintenance needs. So going on to our capital improvement maintenance, we call it CIP. Once again, it's also based on life cycle compliance, and it's really to go ahead and improve the condition and function of a lot of our amenities. To put it in more layman's terms, this includes items that are over $25,000, and typically they would be roof replacements, building systems, playground rebuilds, sports lighting upgrades, parking lot repaving, security system upgrades. So once again, pretty large ticket items. This slide right here kind of basically gives you some an idea of what annual per acre O&M costs are throughout the country. And as you can see, undeveloped, just natural land typically costs $150 per acre annually to maintain, all the way up to $1 million for a very highly developed and programmed downtown park. To kind of put it more in perspective of what we have here in Raleigh, our average for our neighborhood parks is in line with the $5,000 a year per acre. And then also, if you look at the multi-use regional parks, it's at $25,000 an acre for routine maintenance. That is in line with properties such as Pullen Park. So we are in alignment with some of the national trends are for routine park maintenance. Moving along, this is just a snapshot of what our annual capital improvement maintenance funding has been from FY 2010 all the way through FY 2020. So we have had some peaks and valleys, primarily likely, as you can see, in 2011, due to the recession, we went down to 1.3 million. On average, our capital maintenance funding is usually about the $4.8 million mark. We've had a high year of $5.8 million in 2018. And I did want to point out that in 2021, due to the pandemic, we did go ahead and have another decrease down to the $1 million mark, very similar to the recession era of 2011. And that's where we're currently at today at $1 million in our CIP funding. Also, to give you an idea of our debt service, since 2000, we have had 4 park bond programs that have ranged from a low of $16 million all the way up to $92 million, which has been our most recent park bond program. And it is interesting to point out that our 2014 bond program, 60% of that bond program was dedicated to park and greenway reinvestment. And also our 2/3 bond that we used in 2019, we were able to put $2.5 million back into Greenway Bridge and stream bank repairs, primarily Structure 106, as well as a lot of erosion and storm repairs along Crabtree Creek. So on this slide, we're basically kind of showing you some comparisons to other cities within the state of North Carolina. Once again, our 5-year capital improvement budget average is $4.8 million. And on the right, you can kind of see where that comes from. It comes from, in Raleigh, it comes from general funds, facility fees, a revolving fund, earned interest, and bonds. The 2 closest comparisons we do have within the state are both Cary and Asheville. As you can see, Cary, basically their funding source is a general fund, and they're slightly below us at $4.6 million. Asheville has 3 funding sources, general fund, bonds, and partnerships, and they're at $4.5 million. But I did want to point out that those 2 cities are much smaller than our Raleigh PRCR system. Moving along on our maintenance and funding needs, we have estimated that it would take approximately $10 to $15 million annually to kind of make up the track on our deferred capital improvement maintenance. I did want to point out, though, that currently we wouldn't be able to be staffed to execute that amount of work, so we would have to go back and determine what would be the appropriate funding level to be able to make it more manageable. Also, it's based on our current facility and greenway asset inventories, studies and assessments that we have done, and it's also based on best practice life cycle timelines, costs, and manufacturers' recommendations for proper funding and maintenance. So I know there had been questions in the past regarding the 1 cent and 2 cent tax and how much that would generate in revenue and what the impact would be to the homeowners. So as you can see here, a 1 cent, a penny tax would generate $7.6 million in revenue. And the impact can range anywhere from an additional $15 on a homeowner's annual tax bill if they live in a $150,000 home, all the way up to $50 for a home that's assessed at a $500,000 value. For a 2 cent tax, you would just double that amount. So a 2 cent tax input would be a $30 impact on a $150,000 home, up to a $100 impact on a $500,000 home. And then finally, I wanted to kind of talk about dedicated property tax. So we do have dedicated property tax rates that do fund the following items in the city of Raleigh: housing, street resurfacing, and also the Dix Park debt. Moving forward, we have developed some strategies that can kind of really help us maybe fund the difference, a gap. It includes including maintenance funding in our future PRCR bond packages, incorporating general fund contributions to dedicated property tax allocation, really working with the private development community to see if there's ways we can provide having public-private partnerships for park spaces and trails, engaging more with our community and corporations to see if we can find philanthropic avenues for funding, as well as finding additional volunteers, and then also continuing to look for grant opportunities at all levels, whether it be federal, state, local, private, and for nonprofit. And we can accomplish this through some of our nonprofit partners as well. So as we look at the next steps for City Council, March 9th, you all have a work session on the status of the capital bond program. Shortly after, March 12th to 13th, at your retreat, there will be a presentation on potential park bonds and discussions there as well. And then finally, on in May of 2021, there will be some proposed budget presentations overall as part of the overall citywide budget. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Oscar. I see Councilmember Fort and then Councilmember Cox.
Good afternoon, Mr. Carmona. Thank you for the presentation. I guess as a follow-up to an inquiry that I've had, before, will you be giving us some information at the retreat about the 4 locations that need air conditioning units to be installed, or when will we hear something additional about that?
Yes, we actually had submitted a request through the CIP program to have those funded, but we're also going to put them on a park bond recommendations as well, so we can make sure that we are going to get those taken care of this upcoming few years.
Thank you.
And we also did, and we also did include it in a budget note to budget.
Councilmember Cox.
Yeah, I was wondering how we're doing compared to other cities in terms of raising grant money.
As far as raising grant funds, right. we have been doing I would say a great job. I know a lot of our staff have been seeking grants to kind of leverage some of our projects, especially as it revolves around environmental justice and education, and then also as part of Dix Park, we have been receiving several grants to help fund the Rocky Creek Branch feasibility study and also the rehabilitation work out there. So we continue seeking grant opportunities and try to apply for as many as we can.
Okay. But, I mean, how does that compare to other cities?
I would say we're either on par with them or doing a much better job.
Really? Okay. Thank you.
I think I saw Councilmember Knight and then Councilmember Branch.
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. Thank you for the presentation. This is helpful. I think I will be putting this as one of my priorities as we go forward, because I think this is we've got to set a course here that's sustainable for our ever growing parks and greenway system. And I think right now it's not for maintenance and operations. And as we look around at the way that other cities have done it and are doing it, and the way that we have dedicated our property tax, I think that's something that we need to look at very critically as to be innovative in our funding for this very important aspect, infrastructure part of our city. And as we've been going through the pandemic, we see how much even more important this outdoor recreation and the access to our parks and greenways are for all the residents of our city. So I think this is something we need to be thinking about very critically, and I'm going to be very interested in how we can set a course to really improve our parks through maintenance and operations monies that we have not been doing so far. And I think we need to look at it comprehensively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Branch.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Oscar, for the presentation. My question is around, you made a comment, if you had the 15 million annually, you currently don't have the staff to basically, implement what that would, to implement that type of maintenance. So my question is, based on the current staffing, how much more could you use based on your current staff? And if you had the 15 million annually, how much more staff would you need? So not looking for it right now, but maybe in another future report. Because that information helps, I think, us as a council make the decisions that we need to make, especially when we start looking at priorities. We need to know, based on how much can you take on with your current staff, and then if you had the 15 million, how much more staffing would you need? Because for me, that would be extremely helpful. That's all I have.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I think I saw Councilmember Buchan raising his hand.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Branch, I was going to ask a similar question. Appreciate that. And I'm going to follow a bit Mr. Knight's comments. And Oscar, thank you for being with us today. I'm trying to compare two slides, the one on the maintenance needs, which was 10 to 15 million, versus the historical capital improvement maintenance. And I'm hoping maybe you can check my math as a person who's somewhat mathematically challenged. And maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but if our maintenance funding was 1.3 to 5.8 million, and our needs were 10 to 15 million, so is it fair to say we've essentially run a maintenance deficit of somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 million every year? Do I have that roughly right?
Yes, sir. If we're at well, it can vary anywhere between 5 to 10 million. That would be the gap.
Okay, right. Yeah, thank you. And that's an annual number. So essentially, then, if you look back over these last 10 years, we've piled up some 50 to 100 million in maintenance that probably ought to have been done in the last 10 years, but wasn't. Is that fair?
Yes, I don't have the specific numbers with me, but that's definitely something that we can look into and follow back up.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you for that. And if I may, just a brief comment on that. Yeah, and I won't hold you to the numbers. I was just looking to make sure that I was drawing a valid comparison between the needs and the historical funding. And so it's hard to see the real life impact, but I think that this, $5 to $10 million shortfall we've been running in parks budgets is, when you see it when you pull up to a community center and the parking lot is in bad shape, or you stop at a comfort station and the facilities are not functioning properly. It's not comfortable at all. And then greenways, of course, we know the famous case of Structure 106. Thank you for mentioning that. So we've got a lot of work to do here, Council. And as Mr. Knight said, I hope we'll take a serious look at it and make some improvements for the community. Thank you.
Councilmember Melton.
Thanks. I recall early last year, we did a work session on maybe how to position some greenways as transportation corridors or transit corridors, how to share some funding costs. We talked about how to make our greenway system a bit more resilient. And I'm wondering how we're going to factor that discussion and any planned work into this sort of the capital improvements issue and the deficit issue. Because I know we talked about it last year and and 2020 happened. So I just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of some of those perhaps policy or initiative shifts.
Okay, we are in constant communication and collaboration with transportation. We are also making sure that our Greenways Advisory Committee has BPAC representation and vice versa. So we are in constant communication and collaboration and coordination. So that is still on our radar, and we still, are going to be exploring those possibilities moving forward. And it's also included in the Greenway Master Plan, as right now as we're going through the Greenway Master Plan update.
Any further questions from Councilmember Cox?
One of the comments I get from people from time to time is, why do we have to increase budgets and increase spending? Why can't we do more with the money that we have? And I was wondering if you could help me answer that kind of question when that comes up.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Councilmember Cox?
The question is, like, why can't we do more to maintain our parks without having to increase spending? Why can't we do more using the resources that we currently have? That's a question that frequently comes to me, is if we have restrooms that need to be repaired, why can't we get them repaired? Why do we always have to come back and tell the taxpayers we have to increase your taxes in order to get that work done? And I'm not sure how to answer that question.
There are several factors that come into play. One is if we continue growth and developing new parks, adding more miles of Greenway Trail, we may not get the funding or the staffing resources to be able to support that. So really trying to maintain those additional acres or additional miles with existing staffing does really pose a challenge to us, and that's why we're asking for that funds as the system grows. So do the maintenance needs that grow with it. So we try to be very conservative as much as we can, and really try to find innovative ways that we can go ahead and try to keep up with the demand with our current resources. However, it does tend to be very challenging at times, and that's when we start having to ask for some additional funding to be able to keep up with that demand.
I'm going to keep us moving forward then. I think everybody's asked a question. I just want to say, as a mom of 2 kids, I really appreciate all of our parks and all of our park staff. So thank y'all for presenting today and doing what you do every day.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Manager.
Okay, final item for today is for informational purposes only, unless you guys have questions. Each year for the past several years, we have conducted a residential budget priority survey. And so what you have in your packet is a copy of that survey. It will go out next month, and through the month of March, residents will have an opportunity to weigh in on what they deem as the most critical budget priorities. Staff will then compile all of that data and present it at the budget work session in April for your consideration. So we will combine both the community's voice as well as council's voice through this priority process this year to see where we land, to see if we are synced up or if we're out of alignment in some areas and what we need to do to address that. And that, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, continues with our outline and mandate of meeting design efficiency. So I said an hour and 15 minutes earlier today. I missed it by 1 minute.
I don't think that's y'all. I think that's our lots of questions. Do council members have any final items for today? All good. Anything else from city manager, city attorney?
No, thanks staff for awesome presentations.
Absolutely. I am constantly amazed at how much work our budget team does. It's mind-blowing, and I'm quite grateful, and I'm sure this entire council is quite grateful for all of their excellent work. With that, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank y'all.